The cold wakes you before your eyes even open. Not a chill. A cold that sits in your bones like it lives there. You reach for a blanket that isn't warm enough. You already know it won't be. Now imagine that cold multiplied by 40 degrees. No walls, no blanket, no fire that anyone has shown you how to build. This is what a single night during the last ice age actually felt like. And for roughly 100,000 years, this was simply Tuesday. You would not last until sunrise. Not because you're weak, because your entire body was built for a world that no longer exists once you step into that landscape. Start with the temperature. During the peak of the last glacial period, around 20,000 years ago, average temperatures in Ice Age Europe dropped as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, below what we experience today. That sounds abstract. Here's what it meant on the ground. Winter nights on the open steppe could plunge well below negative 30 degrees Celsius. Your modern body, soft from central heating and insulated jackets, starts losing core temperature within minutes of real exposure at that range. Hypothermia isn't a slow decline, it's a countdown. But your ancestors weren't just surviving that cold, they were thriving in it. So what did they have that you don't? Fire is the obvious answer. But fire wasn't obvious to early humans either. The archaeologist Will Robrooks, who studies the deep history of fire use, found that habitual, controlled use of fire didn't become widespread and reliable until roughly 400,000 years ago, long after humans had already been dealing with cold climates. Before that, fire was opportunistic, a lightning strike, a smoldering log, something you tended, not something you made on command. Imagine depending on the sky's mood for your only source of warmth. Once fire became reliable, everything changed. A hearth wasn't just heat, it was a reason to gather. It was protection from predators who avoided the flicker of light. It was the difference between raw, barely digestible food and cooked food that unlocked far more calories per bite. Calories you desperately needed because staying warm burns enormous energy. Your body at rest in the cold isn't resting at all. It's working a furnace shift around the clock. Now picture the shelter, not a tent, not a cabin. At sites like Dolní Věstonice in the modern Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of dwellings built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks, stacked and arranged like architecture, then likely covered in hides. Why mammoth bone? Because in a landscape with almost no trees, there was no wood to build with. You built with what the land gave you, and the land gave you the bones of the largest animal willing to die for your survival. Let's reconstruct a night inside one of these shelters. You're pressed close to 3 or 4 other bodies, not out of affection, but out of necessity. Shared body heat isn't a comfort, it's infrastructure. The fire at the center burns low, someone assigned to feed it through the night in shifts, because if it goes out, it may not come back. Outside, wind moves across open tundra, with nothing to slow it down for hundreds of miles. You can hear it test the hide walls. You do not go outside, not for water, not for anything, until light returns. Your clothing mattered as much as your shelter. This is where the evidence gets remarkable. At the Sungir site in Russia, burials dated to around 34,000 years ago include thousands of tiny ivory beads, arranged in patterns that match exactly where sewn, tailored clothing would have been. Not draped fur, fitted, layered, engineered garments stitched with bone needles and sinew thread. This wasn't primitive covering. It was cold weather technology developed by trial and error across generations, refined the same way you'd refine a piece of gear you depended on to stay alive. Here's a detail that should reframe how you think about primitive people. Researcher Eric Trinkhaus, who has spent decades examining Ice Age skeletal remains, found surprisingly few signs of severe frostbite damage on the bones of humans who lived through the coldest stretches of this period. That's not luck. That's competence. Their bodies show fewer cold injury markers than you'd expect from a population living in negative 30-degree winters with no modern insulation. Meaning they weren't just enduring the cold. They had systems, clothing, shelter, and shared knowledge so effective that the cold rarely got the chance to maim them. Now here's the twist. You'd assume the biggest threat on an Ice Age night was the cold itself. It wasn't. The bigger threat was isolation. A single hunter alone on the steppe, Without a group, without a fire tended in shifts, without someone to notice if he didn't wake up, had almost no chance. Survival wasn't an individual skill. It was a group technology. The real innovation of the Ice Age wasn't fire or bone needles alone. It was cooperation refined into a system so tight that no single person needed to be a genius because the group together functioned like one. This is the part that should sit with you. You live in a world engineered for individual survival. Central heating in your own room. A furnace that doesn't need anyone to feed it. A blanket you don't have to share. It feels like independence. But for over 90% of human existence, that kind of isolation would have been a death sentence. Your ancestors' bodies, and honestly your body too, evolved expecting company at night, expecting shared warmth, expecting someone else awake to keep watch. So the next time you're alone in a warm room, notice something. Notice that the silence you take for granted, the ability to sleep without anyone tending a fire for you, without anyone's body pressed against yours for warmth, is one of the strangest luxuries in the entire history of your species. It took mammoth bone architecture, tailored clothing sewn bead by bead, and fire finally tamed after hundreds of thousands of years of failed attempts, just to get you here. You still wake up when your body's ready. No alarm, no schedule, no fire to check on, no shift to take. But now you know what that comfort actually cost, and how many freezing nights it took your ancestors to earn it for you.